Jer si milostivi čovekoljubiv Bog i tebi slavu uznosimo, Otcu i Sinu i Svetome Duhu, sada i uvek i u vekove vekova.
In a world of shadows and secrets untold, where primeval stories make the brave go cold, mighty gods on high and realms below, whispers of legends that shape each soul. And nightmarish dreams, cryptids lurking, nothing's as it seems, giants walking, angels and demons fight, only truth can bring the light. Through the echoes of time the tales unfold, mysteries arise as the prophecies are foretold. From valiant knights to buried treasure, this podcast brings nothing but pleasure. Welcome to myth, mysteries and majesty. Study with us and don't be a travesty. Theology, mythology, fantasy and horror, from dungeons and dragons to Skyrim and Mordor. And Mordor, the powers haunt the evening, in gothic castles where they're screaming. Wizards cast spells in their towers tonight, exploiting enigmas hidden from our sight. Archaeologists make excavations deep of the ancient tombs where pharaohs sleep. In the dust of ages we chronicles keep, storytelling's power of monsters that creep. Myths, mysteries and majesty is the place for you to learn about this haunted space. From scholarship to manuscripts of old, unlock the secrets of wisdom and gold.
Blessed All Hallows Eve and the Reformation Day, everyone. Tonight we have Darth Vader back with us. Maybe he's finally ready to bend his knees, just like Dagan, to the supremacy of Jesus Christ. We welcome Paul back on the channel, who is jumping in instead of Sean, who had to go steal candies from kids and, of course, keep them for himself instead of sharing with his friends on this 3M podcast. Shame on him, but yeah, we'll welcome Sean back next week. Paul, brother, thank you so much for jumping in. How is everything with you? And maybe if we can start the podcast by you reintroducing yourself.
Yeah, hey guys, good to see you again. Good to be here. Yeah, let's cut Sean a little slack. He's out with his family. That is a good thing, but we're there. I'm good. It's fall. As I said, Reformation Day. It's Halloween here. And my Blue Jays are in the World Series. Baseball, we're in that season. We're going to have a great conversation. I've been working for a church. I'm pursuing pastoral work. I've got some seminary studies under my belt, and I love the ancient Near East and that stuff. And we're going to have a chat about some of those ideas tonight.
Yeah, and just for the context for everyone who is Christian watching this today or later these days, weeks, months, if you're upset by Halloween and supposed pagan origins, this is not the episode on it. We're not going into trying to make cases for or against it. But if it bothers you, you can tell people Happy All Hallows Eve. Tomorrow you can say Happy All Saints Day. And you can also, if you're from Reformed theology, you can also say Happy Reformation Day if that bothers you. So you can use one of those slogans. Paul, when it comes to this deity that we'll be dissecting tonight, it's pronounced Dagan, but sometimes even Dagan, based on the spelling. Sometimes after G, some manuscripts have O, some have A, but basically it's the same Philistine deity that manuscripts show, and the data shows that it was worshipped even 3 millennia before Christ. What is it about this deity that, if we can just summarize it before we start diving deep, that will be interesting for the audience who may be biblical Christians, or they may be just interested in mythology and folklore and in the Lovecraftian mythos?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. First of all, I mean, if you like Bible studies, Dagon shows up in the Bible. So who is this guy? Where does he come from? And a little bit about it. If you're a fan of ancient myths, ancient religion, this actually ties back to some stuff because the Dagon and his entity actually shows up in Babylon and Mesopotamia, ancient Assyria, and the Martu. Ugarit, which we talked about previously. And we're going to talk a little bit tonight about kind of where that fits, because there's a couple different explanations or descriptions of what he seems to be or how he shows up. So we're going to cover a little bit of that. And then from there, and some of the older descriptions, ancient descriptions, there's a bit of folklore that goes with it, and H.P. Lovecraft picks up on that and then makes it his own later as well. And it's kind of spooky, so it fits the season as well. But yeah, we're going to start, I think, with some of the older stuff or what the history is. So if you like history or if you like mythology, folklore, we'll go there, and then we'll talk about some more recent stories.
Yeah, thank you for that wonderful background and context, both when it comes to history, mythology, but also Lovecraft, because as we know, many video games, novels, board games, movies were influenced by great Lovecraft. And we actually even dedicated one lengthy episode long in the past, about a year and a half ago, when three of us dissected his mythos, his religion, or actually lack of it, and what inspired great Lovecraft into creating Cthulhu and the whole pantheon of gods and the way of this cosmicism that he was making back in the days. So let's start with the first article that comes from Carson and this website, uncommonpursuit.net. And by the way, I have included all the sources in the episode description, so for more details, you can always go and check them out. So what I like is that Carson got several sources all at in one article at one place. So he starts by famous Christian website Got Questions. So he's like, Dagan was the chief deity of the Philistines, and we mentioned this at the beginning. And the worship of this pagan god dates back the 3rd millennium BC. According to ancient mythology, Dagan was the father of Baal. He was the fish god, D-A-G, or Dag. In Hebrew means fish. I also found another translation that says small fish. And he was represented as a half-man, half-fish creature. This image furthered an evolutionary belief that both man and fish had evolved together from the primal waters. That's very interesting. Dagan may have also been the provider of grain. So Dagan was similar to many other idols in that he personified natural forces that had supposedly produced all things. Let me just read a couple more and we'll stop here. I'll skip John MacArthur. Christianity.com, very short intro or entry. The name Dagan in the Bible derives from the word, again, dag, which means fish. As we can see, the Syrians decided to take the quite literal route of calling it as they saw it. New Advent Encyclopedia says, again, it's a Philistine deity. It is commonly admitted that the name Dagan is a diminutive form, hence a form of endearment derived from the Semitic root dag, and means accordingly little fish. The name therefore indicates a fish-shaped god. And then Brit from Bible Study Tools says some depictions of him, of Dagan, made him like a merman. Very interesting. Sort of a cryptid, a fish from the waist down. Some scholars have called him a fish god, which seems logical, especially for the Philistines along the coast, but other scholars have disputed it, since there's more evidence that he was responsible for crops and grain. Even his name is connected to an old noun for grain. And I'll stop here because there's a very good scholarly, a little bit longer entry from the Dictionary of Deities and Demons, which is probably many of our favorite academic resource on the channel, but I'll stop here. So Paul, here we see a number of different when it comes to both a scholarly and historical connections and backgrounds when it comes to this deity. First, he was seen as a fish, and he's usually portrayed, even in the Lovecraftian mythos, he's portrayed as a fish or half fish. But later on, we'll see that the word could have meant something else. But still, even if it was a fish, that would mean that this deity was in charge of including waters, not just waters, but including waters. And we mentioned the word merman. So now my brain inevitably goes to cryptids. I'm going thinking, well, could this be one of the chaotic monster deities that God has no problem dealing with, as we see, for example, some of these traces in Genesis 1. I'm not saying Dagan is Genesis 1. I'm saying sorta. Could we then see something later in the Old Testament about Leviathan? Because Dagon certainly reminds, in a way, of Leviathan and its tentacles, and it's something scary deep there down in the waters. Can we please hear what is your understanding of this?
Well, I think there is a bit of a tie to like a storm thing that comes up as well. So if you want to talk about a fish in a storm, then there certainly is some Leviathan imagery in there. I will say this: I think the reading through a few articles is, at least from medieval times, there is a very strong connection to the dag, the fish idea, and it's there. But going back before medieval times, it gets a little murky that was the connection, but it's become very, very popular, and that's the one you can see in this article. I like this article because they actually quote quite a number of sources, which makes it you can see where the consistency is or where it changes. But before medieval times, it's not clear. There's the other thing we know now is that Dagon shows up in older texts, and like Ugarit and that, which would actually predate most of the Hebrew language. So if you're trying to take a Semitic root or Hebrew dag fish and get Dagon, it doesn't quite work because the word actually exists before it. So that's one thing. The other thing too is I've got a little bit of a Hebrew background. I'm not a scholar by any means. Took about a year of it in seminary. I've been working with it. So I was curious about, because I wasn't super familiar with the diminutive forms. That ending, the on, is a diminutive form that goes with nouns. So this is a valid conjugation. It's a word you can put together to mean little fish, but it's not the most common one. Actually, when you get to diminutive forms in Hebrew, the actual most common thing is that you repeat a consonant. So if you go look up little fish in like a Hebrew dictionary, the word there is actually degeg. It's two G's, not on. So I think people have pieced it together based on what they know from the language, from the common things, but it's actually not the right combination as far as I can tell. If anything, Dagon exists before it, and I think maybe the correlation is backwards, that we may have gotten the word fish, dag, from Dagon and not the other way around. So that's something to think about. We do know that he was connected to the Philistines. There was a lot of worship centers kind of in West Palestine and up in Lebanon and Syria. And some of the name, we have records from there. So it is a Levant sort of thing. And these things are connected together. But even though it's repeated, I don't think the connection is that close personally.
Okay, thank you. And for people who like conspiracies and trying to look similarities in symbols, words, numbers, here's one of those that comes from my culture. When you see how in the title of this article, Dagan is spelled, well, take the alternative version that after G, it's not O, but it's A, so Dagan. So in my country, we have a male name, Dragan. So the only difference between Dagan and Dragan would be R between D and A. But what if you go even further and say, what about dragon? So we can go all the way with these conspiracies, with all these rabbit trails that will never be ended. But guess what? Scholarly and academic sources do not support things like this. But if you like those things, you're free to go and research any topic we cover on the podcast and try to find potential similarities and connections. But just be aware that this may not be true. You may just like what you hear or see symbolism. Just like when I was announcing this episode the other day, I had one female friend, Christian, who said just because the way of Dagan would be portrayed with that hat that would be like top of the fish, and she would compare that with the way the Catholic Pope has the hat that would go like this. She was like, oh, this is where they're getting their hat, their inspiration from Philistine mythology, from Dagan, and therefore Catholics are idolaters. So I'm like, I'm not Catholic, I don't have to defend them, but that's not where they're getting inspiration from. So again, if you like these things, you can certainly try to connect them. You can create your own hypotheses and ideas, but just be aware that that may not be actually real. Okay, before I continue, I have to ask you, Paul, have you ever heard of people trying to connect Dagan and Dagan's hat with the way the Pope has his hat?
No, but I have heard a connection with what the hat that those pharaohs used to wear, because it's kind of similar too, right? It's that pointed, crowded, and that's a snake. So again, you get kind of the Tiamat imagery and stuff back and forth. But
yeah. And again, I'm no Catholic, but like, dude, like, why would Catholics take from Philistine mythology from 3,000 years before Christ the shape of their head when they were serving Dagon and including in papacy? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
It's one of those things where, correlation is not causation. They can be related. That really is just that kind of hat and headdress was common in cultic worship of all kinds. So it doesn't have to be one. It's just that, you get a priest doing something, that's what priests wear.
Yeah. And now we're turning to the most interesting entry, at least when it comes to this article. So Carson continues his post. He said, however, these popular sites appear to have gotten it wrong when he speaks about the etymology and the word meaning fish. He says, in a more academic resource, the Dictionary of Deities and Demons, which is, by the way, extremely expensive and very hard to find, he is quoting J.F. Healy, and then this is the explanation that is given. The etymology of the name Dagan is uncertain. Etymology is based on dag, or fish, or dagan, or grain, and on a root meaning be cloudy, and in Arabic is daj or dajana, or in my language it would be Diana, which is a female name, which maybe we can go to the New Testament and the goddess with similar name. They're all equally dubious, and there's no contextual evidence from the Hebrew Bible or from Mesopotamian/West Semitic sources to give much support to these speculations. It is wiser to restrict oneself to what can be known from the evidence, principally that Dagan was a deity of major significance in the Mari region in the Old Testament period, and that his worship appears to have spread widely in later times. Excuse me. He was thus adopted, no doubt in some syncretistic form, perhaps as a corn god by the Philistines. We cannot resolve the question of the etymology of the name Dagan or Dagon. It could be pre-Semitic. The connection with fish cross-references biblical evidence as interpreted by this, I think he was a Jewish scholar, Wellhausen, Jerome, and later Jewish traditions such as Rashi and Kimchi, is entirely secondary, being based on a folk etymology, meaning that came way later and should not be taken as the first source for your academic research. Likewise, in the 1 Samuel commentary where Dagan appears, scholar David Tsumua explains the following. Two major etymologies have been suggested. Number one, medieval Jewish commentators, Rashi or Kimchi, explain the meaning as fish or DG, but this folk etymology is no longer accepted. And number two, others say that this is from grain, Dagan, and this would make him a vegetation deity. But Healy is cautious about positing, how do you pronounce this? Positing this etymology for the connection with grain, which is secondary and based on the coincidence of the West Semitic word for grain. Since Dagan is Semitic and the Philistines were not, they presumably adopted Dagan sometime after their arrival, but how soon, it is not known. Biblical writers clearly consider Dagon as the Philistines' national god. However, and we see this in Judges 16 and 1 Chronicles 10, worship of Dagon as at Ashdod still continued around 50 BC, and we can see this in Apocrypha such as 1 Maccabees chapters 10 and 11. So, from this brief look into the subject, it appears that the idea that Dagon was a fish god started with medieval Jewish commentators. And I'll tell you, this is like easily 4,000 years after Dagon was first worshipped in this region, if not even more. So we have to be, again, careful when we think that we know something that cannot be actually always proven. And this comes with everything in life, with politics, with religion, with science, with just anything. But this was popularized by Julius Wellhouse and has continued to be a popular understanding to this day. However, scholars who have studied the original cultural context reject this theory. I know it's a small issue, but I think it's important that we get it right. And yeah, then he summarizes this text by saying that we have to be careful when we say that Dagon was for sure or surely a fish god, when actually he was more connected to the grains and to the crops. And I think this is a beautiful and wonderful entry in this article, because it helps us go back way before then the medieval Jewish commentators who would say, "Oh, well, no, Dagon was connected to fish." So now we have earlier sources. Paul, how can we summarize this for people who are less theological, less into like studying academic books, but they still love mythology or to study the Bible? How important is this for us to understand proper context of certain deities or monsters or spiritual beings in the Bible? How can that help us when it comes to the spiritual warfare, to our prayerful life, to our studies, to our teaching others, and for all of that which encompasses our Christian life?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I would say is that when you're approaching something like an ancient text like the Bible is we got to be careful, and especially if you're Hebrew or Semitic, Philistine, those languages, they're not related to the languages that most of us speak. So if we're going to make correlations, we need to be very careful, just because it's not a one-to-one thing. I mean, even looking at that, in the first part, they talk about being a corn god. Corn is the Old English word for grain. And then when they discovered corn in North America, that became corn and grain became the main word, right? So even our own language has changed and is represented two different ways in these articles. So we just have to be careful. I think that, with this, you can see the relationship, and I like it because they lay out a little bit of the timeline. They do mention Jerome, who would be earlier than medieval, but there seems to be some other relations that are older than that. So we just need to be careful. And like I said, I think if anything, that they've got the relationship backwards, that Dagon or Dagan was probably represented earlier, and perhaps the word for grain or fish came from his name instead. The other note I just wanted to put, in case people aren't familiar, Julius Wellhausen was originally an Old Testament scholar, moved into both Islamic and New Testament studies. He's the guy that's basically came up with the documentary hypothesis, which is also known as JEDP. And there's multiple sources for the Torah, Old Testament, and that sort of thing. Depending on how you feel about that in his work, then his comment and report that Dagon comes from Dag could be more or less reliable. And that's all I'll say
he is the most famous based on his JEDP theory. And if you're a conservative Christian like I am and Paul is, that doesn't mean you can discard anything as garbage immediately from the get-go. But then you could be a little bit careful when it comes to that person and their scholarship. What are their sources, what are their motives, and things of that sort. So yeah, and that doesn't mean that Wellhausen was a bad scholar. It could be just mean that he was wrong at some points, and that's fine. We're all wrong when it comes to certain conclusions. But yeah, I remember studying about him when it comes to the JDP hypothesis. It's like, I believe that his studies can easily lead certain Christians who are not well grounded in the Bible and in Christ to abandon their faith because they may think the Bible is corrupted and cannot be trusted.
I think Wellhausen actually reported in his seminary teaching this stuff that his students were leaving the seminary, leaving the faith, and leaving ministry, and he was confused about why it was happening. I might have that backwards. It might be someone, but someone in that vein where basically people were taken away from their faith and ministry, but he was supposed to be preparing them for it, right? So if that's your fruit, I think we should just hold on. And what is it we're actually doing and teaching here sometimes? But anyways, that's it. Shall we move on to the next article?
Yes, sir. So I was so glad that I found this Jewish library article that was available for free because I wanted to go and check, not just some Christian, but as well, some Jewish scholarly articles. It's pretty much similar in some shape and form like the previous one, but also it goes further because here we start with, again, Dagan. It says this: it was a Syrian and Canaanite god of seed, vegetation, and crops. Dagon first appears as an important and widely worshipped deity, but not as a god of crops. In documents of the dynasty of Akkad, 23rd century BC, which indicate that his cult was well established in the middle and upper regions of the Euphrates around the Balik and Kabur rivers. This region was also called the lands of Dagan, as Dagan was recognized there as the god king of the land. Wow. So he was, listen, I'm just saying this from the divine council worldview. If Dagan as entity existed and exists, Paul, he's easily one of those fallen sons of God and fallen principalities because he wasn't a god of small region. Look at this sentence. Dude, he held up a wide region, so he easily could be one of those fallen Elohim principalities. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, and I think there's also moving that they have Syria and Canaan there, so that's one part. But then they also start talking about Sumer, which is Mesopotamia, and we know the Mari. Actually, we covered this in a previous episode. The Mari, the Martu were the Western people. They were sort of from Assyrian land, but they actually end up coming into Sumer and Akkad, Babylon. I mean, Hammurabi was a Martu. So, with the conquering of Babylon, did his fame rise? Is this something that was connected as well? Because Marduk shows up around that time too, but Dagon's there first. So what's going on? I think there's it's not just ideas. There probably is something spiritual going on.
For sure. And have you noticed that in so many ancient mythologies, once when they either invent gods or certain gods appear to them through epiphany, dreams, hallucinations, rituals, whatever, they're always like god of sky, god of underground, and god of fertility or crops and stuff like that. It's agriculture. It's always like these three deities always appear first because that's the most basic. Like I need sun, I need rain for my crops, then I need the agriculture, then I need fertility to get my wife and kids, and then underworld, like God, like death, punishment, and all these things. So I see these three levels, if we can call them, in so many ancient mythologies and myths. It's like this is how I think every of these pantheons and their pagan divine councils would start first. Like there'll be this trio, the unholy trinity we can speak of, that will start first with something like that. Have you noticed this parallel as well?
I do, and I think in this one actually it shows up very directly, right? I mean, remember like ancient Near Eastern, Middle Eastern, those things are very important. Like that is life and death to be able to get rain for your crops, to have food, either whether it's vegetation or for your livestock. You do that, you get storms, you get rain, you get food, and then also the underworld, and they seem to go together. I don't think it's any coincidence that in Ugarit, when they have a deity list, Baal and Dagon go together, and those are both fertility underworld gods, in their domains as well, right? And somehow, but it's also funny that Dagon is the god king here in the East earlier on, but then later he's seen as third to El, Baal, and then Dagon. So yeah.
Well, maybe it could be like in other religions that and mythologies that gods fight against each other. So El and Baal would fight for supremacy. Son would go after the father, and the father would go after the son. And in that way, like, they wouldn't care who is who, and if they're related to each other, they'll be like, I just need power, money, and whatever. And we see that even though the Bible does teach divine counsel, biblical divine counsel is way different, and the way God deals with entities that He made, including us, is way different. And the only one who dared to go against God in that way is Satan. But it's still that there's no fight. There's no like, oh, it's a duel. Like, we don't know who win. Like, the biblical divine counsel and God being at the head of all the spiritual beings. It's like, dude, there's no dilemma who would win. But let me continue reading this article. Temples of Dagon have been located in Mari and Terka, the chief cities of this region. There are a number of personal names from this region compounded with the name of Dagon. During the period of the third dynasty of Ur, 21st and 20th century BC, the cult of Dagon was introduced into Sumer, perhaps by West Semites. It is significant that the chief cattle park, or better, state bank, of the third dynasty of Ur, which was situated near Nippur and where thousands of animals were collected and distributed for various official uses, was called Silush Dagan, which means in the shelter of Dagon, on the evidence presented by personal names of various West Semites, which will be Amorites and Akkadians, active in Silush Dagan. It is possible that this economic center was originally established by them. Dagon's popularity among West Semites may also be reflected in the fact that this cult reached its height during the Isene dynasty, one of the successors of the third dynasty of Ur in the early Old Babylonian period, which is 19th century BC. So a century or two after they start mentioning details in this paragraph. It is also significant that this cult was important in the time of Hammurabi, the first Babylonian dynasty. Hammurabi calls Dagon Bania, or my creator. Okay, this is very interesting. We didn't see this info in the first article. I like this. So the great Hammurabi and his great law, that's the same person he called Dagon as his creator. However, northern Mesopotamia remained his chief center. It is clear from the Mari documents of the 18th century that Dagon's cult flourished there, since lay and cultic ecstatic prophets from Tersa, which was 43 miles or 70 kilometers northwest of Mari, delivered the gods' words, which they heard in dreams and other ecstatic circumstances to the king of Mari. The Ugaritic documents, 15th and 14th century BC, are the first to shed light on the Dagon cult among the West Semites living in Syria. There and in Canaan, the etymology of his name alludes to the origins of a god of grain. Ugaritic DGN, Hebrew Dagon, which means grain. On the other hand, this term, as the Hebrew vocalization shows, was separated from the name of the deity. In the Ugaritic epics, one of the Baal's epithets is son of Dagon. Wow, okay. And there was an important temple in Ugarit dedicated to Dagon. Perhaps he was sometimes held by the Canaanites to be identical with Il, or the father of the gods. Philo of Biblios, first century first century AD, was described the Phoenician, who described the Phoenician religion according to ancient sources, identified Dagon with Kronos, the father of Greek gods. So Paul, as we see here, through different times and through different epochs of time and through different regions of Middle East, but also Mediterranean regions, because now we're going and switching to the Greek mythology, we see that the deity is spreading its influence. And I think that this is true in the way that how fallen principalities spread their power and influence from country to country, but even to other continents, right? So this is the time where Dagon started being seen maybe a little bit different and being called a little bit different by new generations of people and even new races and new types of people. But as the new worshipers and the new devotees are coming, he's somehow starting to encompasses other segments of their lives, and people start comparing him with the deities in other religions. And here I see um, at least one another parallel when it comes to the ancient mythologies, because in Greco-Roman mythologies we have so many similar deities just with different names. So here we have goddess of fertility in Greek mythology. Well, we have the similar one in Roman, just with different name. Or we'll have god of war, Mars, and here would it be Ares? I forgot. So we see something that is so much prevalent in these ancient mythologies. They're like, oh yeah, we also have the dude who does the same thing, or the lady that has the same concept, or she or he is in the in the dominion of the same thing, but we just call them different way. So I think this is very interesting because it shows, if I can use the word, evolution of mythology, and there are different pantheons and divine councils that are that started back in these days to influence even the Greeks. Any comment on this article and what I said so far?
Two things I want to say, and we should keep moving. So first, it's funny, I had mentioned Hammurabi. I didn't see him in this article, and here he is. So that's interesting. Kronos too was a harvester. He was associated with grain. So the domain in the description is right there. And then beyond that, I would say that, we can see something moving and changing. And I'll pull out one of my old lines that, if you're talking about a spirit that's not associated with the good father, with Yahweh, and we know Dagan is opposed. Was it 1 Samuel 5 through 7 or 8, those chapters, right? The Ark of the Covenant and the statue of Dagan, and Dagan falls over. So this is not a spirit associated with Yahweh God. I will say that the identities of these other spirits go through smoke and mirrors. They don't want you to know their real names and identities, and there is a sort of a manipulation or changing that seems to be useful for them to continue worship, or for them to get what they want. So the fact that he lines up with different deities, or maybe this is one entity that's just kind of changing his persona to different people, I'm not surprised by that at all.
Based on what you said, could that also mean that in some sources, like we read tonight, Dagan would be Baal's father, but in some other sources, it's El. So does it mean, like you said, these entities don't want us to know their proper names, because knowing if enemy knows your strategy or something more intimate about you, it can use it when it comes to the spiritual war. But also, could it be that simply, if El would mean a more general word or a noun for God, that, hey, maybe Dagan was El in a way?
Yeah, I mean, it could be. What we could be seeing, actually, like in Greek mythology, you have a double procession myth. Like, you actually have a son that overthrows a father 2 times. We sort of get that. In a lot of the other ones, you only have it once. So it could actually be an indication of an early version of a double procession myth, that maybe it was El and Baal, and then Dagon's in there, and El is the father of Dagon, but Dagon's the father of Baal. That could be one thing. It could also be he's sandwiched in between because they're not clear, but El and Kronos are kind of in a similar position. So then is Dagon thrown in on top of that? You also get, from Mesopotamian, like Enlil and Enki kind of take that, but then later you get Marduk. And Marduk's not a creator, but he ends up being king of the gods. So you get a relationship that way as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. To continue with this article, a number of personal names in the Alalakh and the Ugarit texts are compounded with the element Dagan. The earliest personal name from central Syria is Dagan Takala, El Emar Naletters, which is, they're just naming their source pages 317 and 18, which, contrary to earlier suppositions, does not belong to southern Palestine but to central Syria. All the same, proof of the Dagan cult in Canaan and the coastal regions is found in the name of the 2 settlements of Beth Dagan, which are mentioned in the Bible, Joshua 15:14 and 19:27. One of the eastern borders of the tribe of Asher, and the second in the territory of Judah. A third Bit Dagan Na or Dagan, is mentioned by Sennacherib, I don't know who's that, as one of the conquests in his third campaign against the West, 701 BC, including Judah, together with Jaffa. And here we have mentioned another source. According to biblical evidence, the Philistines accepted Dagan as their god. Man, I was so tempted to say here they accepted Dagan as their god and savior, based on our Christianese lingo that we use. But in a way, these deities were their saviors because they would expect all the kind of help that exists from their deities, right? That's why they had sacrifices. So the Philistines accepted Dagon as their god and set up temples to him in Gaza. And we see this in Judges 16 and Ashdod in 1 Samuel 5. The one in Ashdod was destroyed by the Hasmonean Jonathan, and we read this in Apocrypha 1 Maccabees 10. In Beth Shean, there is evidence of a Philistine presence in at least the 12th century BC, mainly in the form of anthropoid clay sarcophagi or sarcophagi, I don't know. And these are connected to the Philistines. These Philistines mercenaries very possibly brought to Beth Shean by Ramses III after his victory over them, established their rule there after the collapse of Egyptian sovereignty in Canaan. They apparently found a sanctuary of Dagon in the city, or on the sanctuaries in Beth Shean. The cult of Dagon, and among others that of Ashtoreth, was possibly established by the Canaanite inhabitants. It is to be noted that according to an El Amarna letter, people from Ginti or Gath Carmel, modern Gath in the Sharon, served as the local garrison in Beth Shean. These soldiers possibly had a part in the transplanting of the cult of Dagon to this city, but it is also possible that it came directly from central Mesopotamia of Syria, and their chief deity was Marduk. After the battle at Mountain Gilboa, the Philistines exposed the body of Saul at the temple of Dagon and his weapons at the sanctuary of Ashtoreth. And again, we are seeing this 1 Samuel 31 and 1 Chronicles 10:10. Wow, I love this. I don't like all these names, to be honest, but I love this article because it's so packed with historical, biblical, and extra biblical sources, both Apocrypha and some other, pagan sources. Any extra thoughts when it comes to the conclusion of this article, and how this cult of Dagon spread and started slowly but surely be even included in the Old Testament?
Yeah, I really like this article. It seems less speculative than some of the other ones. It's taking the information and seems to have a pretty good timeline and connections. And it relates it to the Bible as well, which is cool. I'll say, too, for anyone that gets nervous about this stuff, you know, some of this is facts that we pull out and we're just tracking what other people said about it. You know, no one is singing "What a Friend We Have in Dagon," so don't sweat it too much. Yeah, that's good. Nico, for the sake of time, I think if you're happy here, maybe we should move on to the Lovecraft.
Yeah. Okay. For the sake of time, okay, then we'll skip. We'll skip one from Academia, but I'll still leave it to people who like digging into, some other scholarly sources. Let's first go with Lovecraftian mythos. Dagon is a deity from Mesopotamian mythology who was incorporated into H.P. Lovecraft's fiction in the short story Dagon, and we'll soon check the synopsis of that story, eventually becoming a prominent element of the Cthulhu mythos, where he's often referred to as Father Dagon. In the stories of Lovecraft and others, he presides over the Deep Ones, a hidden amphibious humanoid race that resides in the Earth's oceans, and it's worshipped by the esoteric order of Dagon, a secret cult based in Innsmouth. He's the consort of Mother Hydra. And here we have some mythological ancient nearest context, which we already read. But when it comes to the Lovecraftian fiction, the story Dagon was written more than 100 years ago in 1917, and the narrator finds ancient carvings that depict humanoid creatures with webbed hands and bulging eyes. At least one of them is almost as large as a whale. He then sees a similar creature like that in the flesh, a vast Polyphemus-like monster of nightmares with gigantic scaly arms. The creature is never identified as Dagan in the story, though he does seek out, quote unquote, a celebrated anthologist to ask peculiar questions about, regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagan, the fish god. The people of Innsmouth and the shadow over Innsmouth worship at the esoteric order of Dagon, and according to Zadok Allen, are required to take the three oaths of Dagon. Allen at one point rants about Dagon and Ashtoreth, Belial and Beelzebub, golden calf, and the idols of Canaan and the Philistines. The faithful in the order, Allen says, will not die, but instead go back to the mother Hydra and father Dagon, what we all have come from. I don't know what is this word, ONCT. Yep, I don't know. Could be abbreviation of something. To which he adds something in Cthulhu language. Additionally, Robert Olmsted comes to believe that someday the Deep Ones will rise again from the tribute great Cthulhu craved. A city greater than Innsmouth next time. That was a quotation. This suggests that Dagon functions as a deity in the Innsmouth community, but whether he's supposed to be a distinct entity or merely Cthulhu referred to with a biblical name is unclear. I'll stop here. Wow, there's so much to dissect here. We are going back again, Paul, to this fish deity imagery that, as we started saying from the beginning of this episode, it was a misrepresentation by the late medieval Jewish scholars who would depict Dagon not as the god of crops and agriculture, but as the god of the sea. And as we soon saw, that actually earlier evidence shows that was not true. Dagon was not a fish god. But in Lovecraftian mythos, he is presented like that. So based on what we saw, how can we connect this with Divine Council, with Leviathan, with Chaos Monster, and anything of that sort?
Yeah, I see a couple things. So I think for Lovecraft, like he lived before, I think the information from stuff like Ugarit and Alamarna where it came out. So he's working off the common understanding and the folklore that was there, which is why we see the fish stuff. And I think it served his purposes, that he became a regular character and it really fleshed this out. I do see from his story that Dagon kind of takes it like a Baal role, a kingly role, and that, you know, Mother Hydra is very much a Leviathan. So you get a little bit of like a tyranny and chaos motif between the two of them. But then Cthulhu is also lurking in the background of all of this as well. Yeah, so, you know, he's picked it up. He's made it into his fiction and expanded it as it suited. I think it's all just really creepy for the most part.
Yeah. Okay, how do you take this that Dagon is depicted to presides over the Deep Ones, a hidden amphibious humanoid race that resides in the Earth's oceans and is worshipped by this order? I mean, this is so cool. I know it's creepy, but it's also cool in a way because it just depicts a type of occult that goes way above anything that we see here. In our reality, in our presence, this is a cult that is deeply hidden. We cannot see it, and their boss is actually this space fish, demonic monster type of a deity, and they worship him. Right? They invite him in his presence, and he is to them Father Dagon, as for us Yahweh is our Father. So he's leading this cult that has that their agenda, if I can use that word, is to spread out their good news, quote unquote, throughout the whole globe, and they're taking humans one by one. And this entity, just like the entity, all the entities, the fallen Elohim in the pagan narratives and their divine councils, they would spread again their influence by getting more devotees and more worshippers. In their system, in their cult. Some of them would be completely taken out, like we see in some horror movies where basically an alien or monster entity is so powerful and they can communicate with you I mean, through you once when you're possessed. But some of them, devotees, will be left to be in their human shape and form, have their own thoughts, having their own identity left alone. Yet they would willingly go and serve someone like this. And I think here we can also make parallels when it comes to our real life, because some people are part of cults, including satanic cults, not because they were forced to, or not because they were um, not because someone tricked them. Well, Satan did trick them eventually, but because they willingly wanted to be rebellious and turn against Yahweh, against Jesus, and go and serve Dagan, who would be consorted maybe by Mother Hydra, just as in some pagan mythologies we would see a couple of male and female deities that will be a part of certain pantheons. So and again, my mind has to go here to Leviathan and to all these monsters, and to all these cults where again, if we compare this to our reality and theology, we come to the sad conclusion that a lot of people here are just worshiping either deities they made in their own image, or the deities that exist in pop culture in ancient mythologies. So I don't know if it's scary if these entities do exist, or if they're just made in their images. What are your thoughts on this? I know it's a packed question, so you can take time. We still have like about 10-15 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, I do think when it comes to Lovecraft, right, he's very much picking up on spiritual things, but then he de-spiritualizes them. They're much more material. You get they're more alien than angel, to say. And I think we see a divine council motif, but he's taken it and transformed it and sort of flipped it on its head. If I could say it that way. So the deep ones are not cherubim and seraphim and all that sort of thing. They're creepy, fishy people instead, among other things. So he's changed it. And then for the other things that come up is that I think it's a real representation of spiritual things, but those are hard to pin down. I don't think we need to be too scared of it as Christians, other than understanding, that there's something out there, but then also, where Christ is and where he rules, and he sits in the high seat of the divine council now as well. So it's that, I mean, you and I, Nicola, we find this interesting and like to talk about it. Some people don't, and that's okay. I don't think it's all lost, and I don't think it's as terrible as some people say, but I could see people getting obsessed with this, and I don't think that's the point either. So when it is, I do think Lovecraft is something very different with this, and I find I've listened to a few of the stories. To me, they're quite creepy and not my thing. I like some more of the ancient myths as they come out and as we talk about it. Yeah, and say, hey, Amber, it's good to see you in the chat as well. And Dagon and Baal, yeah, they're not. Dagon's not really ever said to be a son. He is a father, but he might be conflated with some other things. I think we were talking about that a couple minutes ago. So yeah, again, yes, the smoke and mirrors in the spiritual world can be hard to understand, and it's even harder to describe sometimes. But we take what other people have written about it, and we like to talk about it and go through. I do think it's really interesting to see how the information on reports. I don't even want to say stories or ideas, because I think there's more to it than just stories, personally. But how the reports or how the cultic worship spread and changed over years, even going probably from Babylon or beyond it, and then outwards towards Greece, right, as this goes, and that there's a common motif. And I would say that that's probably not an accident, but it's also kind of hard to trace how things are moving or why. We just don't have that much information. And I think from that first article, we see that people like to kind of jump at conclusions and put things in boxes, but maybe they're not very good boxes. So
yeah, actually what Wellhausen wrote in the late medieval times, when it comes to the to Dagan and him being supposedly the fish god, this is one of the very good examples that, well, Halloween, right? Reformation Day, how all that it comes with it. I think that people hear one story or one rumor or one source or one article or one side of the whole, you know, story, and when it's passed down through social media or just chatting with your friends, this becomes the norm. It becomes the truth. The same thing with Halloween, being pagan holiday inevitably. I think with so many things, like, I'm coming from the evangelical background. For many evangelicals, Orthodox, and Catholics are just a bunch of people who worship idols. I'm like, seriously, do they? But once when something is repeated among friends, it becomes again the norm, the truth. So the same thing here is happening with Wellhausen and other scholars who, like, Dagon is a fish god, and then that was accepted as amen. It is true, without going further deep into the scholarship, and then that was later accepted again by Lovecraft as, hey, this must be true. So even though his mythos, Lovecraft was a genius, like what he made still is influencing authors to this day, again, in movies, in TV shows, in video games, in comics and everything. But it's a misinformation, just like we have misinformation about, like, oh, Easter is connected with fertility goddess Ishtar. No, it's not. It's you heard somewhere, but now they became the truth, and you cannot prove to people. You can send them scholarly sources, they will still not accept. Like, it's evil. There's no way they'll change their minds, or many other things. So I think this is what was happening, here in a similar way with Dagan. As once when he was accepted to be the fish god, that's it. Pop culture has him as a fish god that will be seen partially as a fish, partially as a man, or as a god. And I would like you to briefly comment on this, if you can, because of this misunderstanding of the word DAG, that would mean fish, and like we saw earlier, that's not the case. Led to a depiction of the deity as half man, half fish, like a merman, and to a misconception in Western culture of Dagan as a kind of a sea god. I love this last sentence of this paragraph, but again, my mind, when I saw merman, I was like, my mind went into the cryptids world, right? Like, what do we think when we see all these spiritual entities that are like half, they're hybrids, they're half this, half that, not just in Genesis 6, but even later on in the whole Jewish background, but not just in the Jewish background. We have stories like that in the whole world. So I'm not saying that merman or mermaids exist. That's not what I'm saying. And I'm not saying that they, even if they exist, that they would exist in the same way that we see giants or Nephilim in Genesis 6 existing. But still, for the sake of the episode and because it's fun, how do you see this merman? Let's say, hypothetically speaking, that mermen and mermaids are true. Let's say everything from the movie Aquaman, DC movies are true, hypothetically speaking. Paul, what would be your theory how mermen can exist? How can even a hybrid of that sort even exist? So I just want you to go into a
Yeah.
nerdy Paul and give me your theory, hypothetically, if this is true.
Well, I think I can even tie it into Halloween and what we see happening now. So I'll go here. This is my take, but it is. I mean, when it comes to mermaids, mermen, that's not a new thing, and that's across the ancient world. They pop up in a bunch of different places. I mean, I think about the sirens in Greek mythology and calling to the rocks and that sort of thing, right? And then that shows up in different places. I mean, I think in the modern age, early modern age, you get mistaken reports and people confusing certain seals and porpoises and stuff because that they hadn't seen, and that happens. But I think if anything, that actually points to part of our imagination or what we perceive, and I don't know if I want to call it a longing or a sense or an understanding of a different kind of being that could exist. Maybe this is on my mind because I was listening to William of Ockham earlier this week, and in him, or the arguments against him, it basically comes down that you can't imagine anything that doesn't actually exist. And even your mind to a certain point is a sensor that there's other ideas being put there that are not your own. I think we've lost that in the modern world with psychology, where so much is empiricism, what we can see, what we take in, or that we're generating ideas. What if a bunch of ideas and categories don't come from ourselves, right? That's it. Flip side of that, is that we've been in a very materialistic society in the West for quite a while, based on empiricism. If you're a Christian and you don't like what's happening at Halloween, I think it's kind of our fault, right? Because Halloween was All Hallows Eve. It was tied to All Saints Day, but most of the church, especially the Protestant church, does not celebrate All Saints Day. We've removed the holy part of it so that you only have this other thing. And by removing the, I'll call it the holy imagination, we secularized the rest of the day and we gave it over. So in that sense, I think it's actually a fault. Oh, yeah. It's there. So maybe we actually need a sense of the holy again, or to bring back some spiritual understanding, or at least pay attention to it. Maybe it hasn't, I think God's always speaking to us. So I don't think it's actually gone anywhere, but we're not paying attention. And really, we're the only ones to blame for that. But with certain things, a certain understanding. And I think that's also what we see in Lovecraft, right? He has no sense of the holy. I don't think he would acknowledge a real spiritual world. So he's trying to take these stories and ideas, and probably something he's experiencing even. I know he had quite a life, and his biography is pretty interesting, but he's trying to explain or work out ideas that he's getting, and where does this come from? And if he doesn't believe in the spiritual or holy, then he's finding a different way to flesh it out. Now, some of it could be just stories, and that's it. But also, he's keying on something, and people are interested in this for a reason. I think people are very interested in Halloween now, and sort of a commercial thing, and because they can party. But I think more recently, maybe we're seeing an understanding or attention to spiritual things. And as a Christian, we should pay attention, because that might actually be a pathway we really need to pay attention to in our culture. So I think those are tied together. I think we can get our attention around to it. And in some ways, I see this, that, maybe we're heading in society now, is you can never really go back, but whatever the next thing is going to be after the modern era or postmodern era, there is going to be an ancient understanding that comes back, I think, at least when it comes to spiritual things, or at least that's what I'm tracking with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. That was beautiful. I won't even ask the question, well, what will be the theory of someone like mermaids, or any that type of other creatures like centaurs, or centaurs coming to existence, if we have the explanation of Genesis 6 and what other scholars gave us through those divine sexual rituals, how the the Nephilim or the giants would come to be, then my mind goes immediately like, well, what about other beings, including mermaids, or centaurs from mythologies and many others? If people supposedly eyewitness that they saw something like that, how would they exist? Would it be another divine ritual? I mean, my mind goes all the ways, and it's like a lot of questions but no answers. But I want to just ask you one more thing, because I want to respect your time. So this will be a very short episode. We came to the very end here. In this segment of the story of the of Dagan in Lovecraftian mythos, it says that Alan at one point rants about Dagan and Ashtoreth, and then Belial and Beelzebub, Golden Calf, and the idols of Canaan and the Philistines. So here we see a lot of names and a lot of deities just pushed together in one sentence. I'm like, whoa, 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 just chill. Dagan and Ashtoreth. And I'm reminded that some archaeologists found, those inscriptions where it says Yahweh and his Ashtoreth. And as I'm reading the book that I will dissect, well, we already did the first episode, but we'll dissect the second part of the book with Spencer Owen this Sunday. I was reading by Father Andrew Damick, and he's explaining that in Hebrew, Ashtoreth does not have to mean only the name of a female goddess from the pagan mythology. It means that this was actually an object, such as a pole. So it could have mean, or rather, it should have mean that when these inscriptions are found, does not mean Yahweh and his female consort, but or like a female goddess that they're supposedly a couple. No, it would mean rather that Yahweh and the pole or something may be made in his honor. But Father Dame here agrees in the book with many scholars agreeing with Heiser. He says, well, even if Yahweh was depicted with a goddess, but isn't that what the Old Testament reminds us all over again, that Israel was not always faithful to Yahweh? They will go after Ashtoreth and they will go after Baals, which would mean Lord or Master, plurality, lords and masters. They will go after all these foreign gods and make covenants with them. And this is why we see in the Old Testament God punishing Israel all over again. And here again in this sentence, we see Dagan, we see Ashtoreth, we see Belial and Beelzebub. And we know that Belial or Beelzebub by Jesus himself was identified with Satan himself in the Gospels. So here I'm thinking, well, if in one sentence we have all these names, could it mean that Dagan is just one of the Belials and Beelzebubs, or Satan's depictions, names, descriptions that will be different from region to region, but actually that we're talking about the original serpent, the original entity that, hey, if Dagan has something to do with chaos and with waters and the depth and the abyss, well, isn't this another depiction and another parallel with Satan?
I mean, it could be. I mean, I think what it's referring to is, or what I want to say, I think Lovecraft is doing a good job of contextualizing the explanations he wants, for sure, right? So he's making references to a number of the old Canaanite and related spirits, and then throws in the golden calf. So at least you got Israel, and you know where he's getting this stuff from. Now, as far as it being another name for the devil, sure. I mean, if we go through all of them, maybe the devil really has a lot of names. I think they're probably separate spirits. I don't really want to give the devil that much credit. I mean, he was a single seraphim, but there is some kind of relation here. And like I come back to is that when you're dealing with this stuff, we've got the good Father, we've got Jesus Christ, we've got the Holy Spirit. We can be very sure about those three in the Trinity. They're very hard to describe, but they seem to come to us through truth and through divine relationship and directness. All the rest of them seem to come at us sideways. And so I'm just taking the stance of being kind of skeptical about how much we can put together, because I think when you're sure, you probably shouldn't be very sure. But that's all I can really say. So I do think for Lovecraft and for stitching that together is he's giving you context on what he wants you to think about at very least. Yeah.
Well, Paul, I know the time is up. I appreciate it went so fast. I feel like we chatted for like 20-30 minutes. Honestly, I don't feel it's been an hour or even longer. I thank you for your time. What will be, well, first let me just remind people that this Sunday evening, again, Spencer, Owen, and I are having a sequel episode to the book released by Father Andrew Damick and his Lord of Hosts book. So we'll be talking about several chapters that we couldn't squeeze in the first episode. It will be another fun biblical theology / ancient Near East / mythologies book. Episodes that you don't want to miss, coming this Sunday evening. Paul, what would be your concluding thoughts when we think about Dagan? Would Dagan, just as you at the beginning, whom we saw as Darth Vader, will Darth Vader bow down to Jesus? Will Dagan, as let's say a true spiritual entity that exists, is one of the fallen principalities from the divine council, one of the fallen Elohim who used to be God's son but has turned his back on him? Will Dagan, just like you who acted like Darth Vader, finally bow down his knees when Jesus Christ comes in all his glory?
Oh, totally. And no one's worshipped Dagon since about the first century BC. So, buddy's on his bad luck right now, unless he's morphed into something else. So, yeah, all the spirits and Lord of Spirits. You talked about. I appreciate Father Andrew, Father Stephen, and at the final day, every tongue will confess Jesus is Lord. So we can look forward to that. Dagon is creepy, kind of mysterious. It was cool to kind of look at some of these stories and accounts of them and how it goes together. But I would not put my stock there. I would look to Jesus, and I'd be remiss to say. I mean, it's good to be back. And Nico, I appreciate the work you do and what you're putting together. And keep going, bud. So.
Thank you so much, Paul. May God bless you. God bless you too, Ember. Thank you for being our friend in the live chat, because Sean has abandoned us, at least for this week. I don't know if I'll find forgiveness in my heart for that, but we'll see. Anyway, may God bless you, Paul, in your future ministry and work, and I always appreciate your knowledge. And I'll see you next time, probably sometimes after New Year. God bless you. And thank you once again. And to the audience, we'll see you in about a little bit less than 48 hours. God bless and take care.